Hello, my name is Bob Stein. I'm the Deputy Chief Economist with First Trust Advisors. I'd like to say hello to ARC Wealth and ARC Wealth clients. I appreciate that you're joining us today amid all the market turmoil. I have a lot to talk about. That includes the political landscape as I see it going into 2020, as well as the interest rate environment, and some points about the U.S. economy that are obviously something of concern to investors nationwide right now. In terms of the political landscape, I was saying a year ago that unless lightning strikes, that President Trump would almost certainly be the nominee of the Republican Party. Well, lightning has struck, and that's come in the form of the coronavirus, and it's not 100% certain that President Trump will be the nominee. I think it's highly likely still. I think it's about 85 to 90% likely, but it's not 100%. If things with the coronavirus go much deeper south in terms of the economy and the financial markets that are compared to current expectations, it is plausible that President Trump will not end up accepting the nomination of the Republican Party. Again, I think that's unlikely. I think he will be the nominee, but it's not 100% certain. In terms of the Democrats, it looks highly likely that Joe Biden will be the nominee. He's going to have enough delegates to get that nomination at the Democratic convention, whether that's held live or virtually later this year. But I think also with him, it's not 100% certain. I think like President Trump, he only has about an 85 or 90% chance of getting, in the end, accepting that nomination. Obviously, there are health-related issues, and there are other things going on in the background, I think, on the Democratic side that may change the calculation of who to put forward as the nominee. If Joe Biden is the nominee on the Democratic side, I think the most likely by far candidate he would pick to be his vice presidential running mate would be Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota. He's from the Midwest. I think he believes she's ready to be president right now. And I think he will put an emphasis on picking somebody who is prepared to be president now in making his selection, somebody he thinks he can work well together with. And if you notice during the presidential campaign on the Democratic side, Amy Klobuchar never really attacked Joe Biden. He attacked other people, but not Joe. I think they have a good relationship behind the scenes, and I think she would be most likely his running mate. She would also, because she's from the Midwest, from Minnesota, from a state that neighbors Wisconsin, help him in a key electoral college state. Bottom line is I think that if Joe Biden and Donald Trump face off against each other later this year, I make Joe Biden actually a slight favorite to win the election. Now, some people are looking at the state of the economy. I'm seeing forecasts that the economy could, over the next few months, do as poorly as it did, at least temporarily, because of the coronavirus and the government restrictions, as it did during the Great Depression. And what president could ever win during an economic scenario like that faced by Herbert Hoover in 1932 when he faced off against Franklin Roosevelt? But I don't see this as purely an economic situation. It's almost a warlike situation. And I think that enables President Trump to have a significant fighting chance in the election. I make Joe Biden a favorite, but only a very slight one. If circumstances turn out to be a little bit better or a little less bad than people now anticipate for the economy over the next several months, I think in that situation, President Trump might be able to gain an advantage and beat Joe Biden this fall. What I'd really like to emphasize, though, is that most people will focus this year on presidential politics. Investors need to be focused not only on what's going on with the race for the White House, but the race for control of the House and Senate as well. In terms of the House of Representatives, some Republicans are talking about taking back the House. I think that's highly unlikely. The last president of the United States to preside over a House of Representatives controlled by the opposite party, who ran for re-election and took control of the House back for their own political party, was Harry Truman in 1948. Eisenhower couldn't do it in 1956. In 1984, President Reagan couldn't do it. In 1972, President Nixon, even though he was beating George McGovern by 23 percentage points in the popular vote, could not take back the House of Representatives. I think the GOP gained 13 seats that year. Well, they need about 16 seats, maybe 17 or 18 seats, given redistricting slightly, court-ordered redistricting in North Carolina. So I think it's unlikely that President Trump, even if he wins, can take back the House of the Republican Party. A couple of other examples where it didn't happen. President Clinton back in 1996 was not able to take back the House from Newt Gingrich and the Republicans. And in 2012, even though Barack Obama was beating Mitt Romney by 4 percentage points in the popular vote, he was not able to take back the House. In terms of the U.S. Senate, I think Republican prospects look a little bit better. Right now, they have 53 seats in the U.S. Senate. Well, one of the seats the Democrats have to defend is Doug Jones' seat in the state of Alabama. 2.5 years ago, Doug Jones beat Roy Moore in a special election in the state of Alabama. Well, this time around, the Republicans are not nominating Roy Moore. They're going to nominate either Jeff Sessions or the former Auburn coach Tuberville, who's actually leading the polls against Jeff Sessions right now. So I think in the end, Alabama is almost certain to go Republican. So the Republicans, even though they only have 53 seats, really effectively have 54. In addition, in the state of Michigan, Gary Peters, the Democratic incumbent, might be in a little bit of trouble. He's not as popular as Debbie Stabenow was 2 years ago. That's the Democratic incumbent who won re-election in Michigan in 2018. And in addition, 2018 is probably not going to be as strong a Democratic year as, 2020 is not as likely to be a strong a Democratic year as 2018 was. So I think the Republicans have an outside shot of winning in Michigan as well. Now, there are states where Democrats are going to pick up. They are likely to win in Arizona. They are also likely to win in Colorado as well. In Arizona, Martha McSally has a fantastic resume, but she's simply not a great candidate. Just because you have a great resume and a great background, she flew jets in the U.S. military, doesn't mean you're a great candidate. So I think in the end, she probably loses. In addition, Cory Gardner in Colorado has amassed a very mainstream conservative voting record in the U.S. Senate. If he were running for re-election in Tennessee or in Missouri, he'd win in a shoe-in, but he's running for re-election in the state of Colorado, which is a little bit to the left of the center of the United States as a whole. So I think he loses as well. If it turns out to be a wipeout for the Republicans, I think Tom Tillis in North Carolina could end up being vulnerable, and Susan Collins as well. Barring the wipeout, I do expect Susan Collins, however, to win re-election. Net, the way I see it today, Republicans who now have 53 seats will probably end up with 51 or 52. So the Democrats will gain seats. I also think the Republicans will gain seats in the House, but not take it over. Democrats can gain a seat or two in the U.S. Senate races this year. Chances are they probably won't take it over. And here's why that's significant. If President Trump wins re-election and still faces off against Nancy Pelosi, who would still be Speaker of the House, every piece of legislation going to his desk would have to be bipartisan. There's no chance for the Republicans to simply roll over the Democrats like they did in 2017 and 2018. However, if Joe Biden were to win re-election, and if he were, if Joe Biden were to win the race, or some other Democrat wins the race, if the Democrats can't take the U.S. Senate, in the end, every piece of legislation going to that president's desk would have to be bipartisan as well. There would be no Green New Deal, even in modified form. There would be no Medicare for all. There'd be no significant wealth tax of any kind. There, in fact, would probably not be a repeal of the Trump tax cuts enacted in 2017. That's why it's important this year to really follow the House and Senate races as well. If one party is able to win the presidency and sweep the House and Senate, they would have much more room to make changes, especially to fiscal policy, to entitlements, over the next few years than they otherwise would. It's really the House and Senate, I think, this year, for economic issues, are more important than the presidency in 2020. Now, in terms of the interest rate environment and the economic environment, the Federal Reserve has recently cut short-term interest rates to effectively zero, where they were in the aftermath of the financial crisis. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Even if we recover from the coronavirus effects, on the U.S. economy more quickly than most people anticipate, I think in the end, the Fed will probably leave rates near zero for the foreseeable future. And that means certainly for the rest of this year, most likely for the rest of 2021 as well. Now, in terms of what's going to happen to the broader U.S. economy, we think the U.S. economy before the coronavirus hit was growing in the first quarter of the year at an average annual rate of around 3%, real GDP growth. Atlanta Fed model was also right around 3%. We think things were humming along quite well. Unemployment rate was low, wage growth was accelerating. Obviously, everything changed when the coronavirus hit. So I think in the end, because of the forceful decline in economic activity we're seeing in the month of March, which is part of the first quarter, we're going to see a mild decline in overall GDP growth for the first quarter and a massive decline in the second quarter. I expect in the second quarter of the year for us to see a 20% annualized decline in real GDP. 20% annualized. And what that means is that we're producing 5% less stuff than we were in the first quarter. Now, I know to some people they might think, well, that's pretty mild, but put it in perspective. The worst quarter during the Great Depression, which was the third quarter of 1932, the U.S. economy declined at around a 38% annual rate for just one quarter. So 20% would be the worst quarter in the last 73 years, going all the way back to 1947. The worst quarter previous to this was the first quarter of 1958, which was a quarter, by the way, when we had the Asian flu in the United States, not by coincidence, when we declined at a 10% annual rate. So there are many parts of the economy that will actually not shrink in the second quarter of the year despite the coronavirus. The rental value of our homes really doesn't change very much. The amount of healthcare services go up. Grocery purchases go up. We're eating at home, not as much in restaurants. We'll also see other slender areas of the economy go up. Obviously, huge swaths of the economy go down. Government purchases go up. Hotels, restaurants, transportation services like airlines go down as well. So we're expecting a 20% annualized decline in the second quarter. So on the pessimistic side compared to most analysts, but that we start to recover in the second half of this year, probably in the third quarter. I don't think it's going to be a boom after this bust, but I do think we'll see reasonably healthy economic growth in the second half of the year. We will not get back quickly to where we were in the fourth quarter of last year anytime soon, not in 2020, probably not in 2021 as well. But I do think we'll see some economic growth as government restrictions are eventually loosened slightly, or in the alternative, if not loosened, if common practice among citizens is to slightly ignore some of those restrictions. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you do well in the year ahead.